Hey folks, thanks for checking out Reigniting Liberty. I'm Deneen Borelli, and Dr. Tom Borelli is in the house, and so is our great guest, Trish Regan. Trish is the editor-in-chief of TrishIntel.com and the host of the Trish Regan Show. She is also a great friend of the Borellis. Trish, welcome to the show.
Listen, it's so good to see you guys again. And we are great friends, and we've been great friends for a long time. So it's always a pleasure to see you, whether it be in person or, you know, via the TV waves here.
Yeah, just so the listeners know, when Trish was on cable news, she was courageous enough to have both Borellis regularly on her show. So now it's payback time.
I've always loved having you. I will just say this: you've both always offered tremendous insights on just a variety of issues. I know, Tom, you and I have talked about some of the economic and business aspects of policy for many years. And Deneen, we've talked a lot about the social issues, but I've always trusted both of you guys for just being totally honest and very forthright in your views and what you think, and always appreciated that and still do.
Thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
you
That's great feedback. Yeah, very kind of you. Well, we know you're a very busy lady because you're also a mom of 3, but we wanted to get you on with your expertise on the economy because, my goodness, the world is falling apart here. So now that we have had 2 consecutive quarters with negative GDP, that means the economy is shrinking over the past 6 months. However, the White House is saying, no, there's nothing to see here. And they're like redefining everything. So look, is the country in a recession? Let's clarify that.
Yes, we are in a recession. And I said this going back to the very beginning of the second quarter. In fact, the classic definition. Okay, so let's just back up. In fact, I'm not kidding. I can consult my uncle has a pretty well-known economics textbook. So for college students across the campus, and I'll just tell you, a recession is, of course, a decline in production here, lasting at least 2 consecutive quarters or at least 6 months. Okay, textbook definition. And you don't need to just go to that textbook. You can take any textbook in America in economics, and it will tell you 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, decline in GDP. That's what equals a recession. You can spin it however you want. You can say, oh, you know, it's not so bad because the job numbers are pretty good, which, by the way, they are. But believe me, you ain't seen nothing yet, as they say, because I believe that all that is going to start to change. It's going to start to shift, which is one of the reasons why people are so concerned that things are going to get much, much worse. And the most tragic thing about all of this, Deneen and Tom, it was so darn preventable. In other words, if anybody there in Washington, and I'm not blaming Biden entirely, I'm going to spread the blame around. Okay, let's go right over to Jerome Powell and company over there at the Federal Reserve. Let's go over to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who frankly should have known better. All of these people, trained economists, should have known that you can't print that much money while simultaneously having multiple stimulus checks and $1.9 trillion worth of spending from Congress. This was a recipe for total failure, and here we are.
Yeah, that's very frustrating, Trish. As you know, you worked in business. You know, I worked in science originally, and some things just don't change. And it's just frightening that there were no adults in the room. Yellen had to know. What does she have, a PhD in economics from Yale? She headed the Federal Reserve. It just boggles my mind that these people allow this to happen without challenging Biden, because they know the horrible consequences for the American people. This is pain for people on fixed income, lower income people. It is really having so much pain on these people, and they know that, and they did nothing.
So I think in this case, they felt, for whatever reason, that if they could just keep it going, right? Like the kick the can down the road, kick the can down the road. If they could just keep things kind of going for as long as possible, that we'd still continue to see growth in our economy. After all, like, hey, you know, go back to the Bernanke years and into the Yellen years over at the Federal Reserve. They printed a heck of a lot of money. and it didn't create any inflation. So they might have said, okay, well, inflation's a hard thing to create, but this time it was different. And this time I kept saying, you got pent up demand. You got people who've been staying home for a year. For goodness sakes, they can't wait to get out and go on vacation again. They can't wait to go shopping again or out to dinner again or do anything again. So you had pent up demand from the American public. You had tremendous savings, right? Because people got stimulus checks. Many of them didn't spend any money during that time. So they had savings and pent up demand that was bound to lead to inflation. Now, any regular person ought to have gotten that. The disturbing thing is, you know, I don't think these people are necessarily out trying to sabotage the economy, right? Because that's one sure way never to get yourself elected again. But what's incredible is that they just failed. Tom, Deneen, they just completely failed to see reality. And it tells us again that there are people in Washington, D.C. that are so divorced from sort of everyday living that even when they study the numbers and you see upticks in prices and uptick in spending, they can't put two and two together and recognize that that's going to equal serious major inflation.
So why is the White House just lying to everyone? Why are they trying to spin their way out of this? Why do you think?
Well, look, they're fearful, Deneen, that if they say, yes, we're in a recession, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They don't want to be negative on the economy. And I understand some of that. I mean, listen, Barack Obama, he was such a Debbie Downer over and over again about the economy. We get a great jobs report. I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. Not according to President Obama. We had a long way to go, a long way to go. So I think they're trying to avoid those mistakes. But you got to be very careful on this one, because when you just ignore the elephant in the room and you try and reinvent and redefine what it means to, you know, be a woman or be in a recession. I only say that because, you know, apparently, you know, men can have babies too, and a recession is no longer 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Then I think that everyday Americans, this isn't even political, just regular folks, independents are like, well, wait a second, what are you really doing? And you become that politician effectively that no one likes and no one trusts. You cannot spin your way out of this. The answer is you're upfront, you're direct, you tell the American people, okay, this is the classic definition of a recession. The good news is the job market's still strong. Let's hope that we persevere. We're taking the proper necessary steps. The answer is not, however, to say we're going to get a new spending bill through because we finally got Manchin somehow miraculously to turn the corner, and we're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars more. I mean, you can't make it up, right? If you got an inflation problem, the answer is not to just print more money. The answer is to pull back entirely. And no one is willing to do that, in part because they're just so hopeful they can make it to November. And then 2 years out from now, and I don't think they will. I think that this economy is effectively the nail in the coffin for the Democrats' political future in the near term.
Yeah, well, let's hope so, because they certainly deserve it. Especially with, you just referred to it, the new idea with Senator Manchin's backing is the Inflation Reduction Act, okay? Let's use more creative language, which is going to raise taxes and also raise spending.
I mean, so think about that.
So, right, and so from my perspective, that's doubling down on stupid. The last time you put in 1.9 trillion, all right, that certainly didn't work. Oh, I got a great idea. Let's spend more. Oh, and at the same time, let's tax. So what are going to be the consequences of this bill if it passes through the reconciliation process?
The consequence is you're going to shrink the economy even more, Tom, because think about what they want to raise taxes at a time when already the Federal Reserve is raising rates, which is going to have a constriction style effect on the economy. And then you're going to say, hey, let's constrict the economy some more by raising taxes. I mean, gosh, I will say this. Look, the last administration, they understood the importance of economic policy. They understood that when you reduce taxes and you lessen regulation, you free up what Americans do best. And we're very good at making money. We're very good at being creative and finding ways to be more industrious. And we had, prior to March 2020, the highest tax receipts in the history of this nation, meaning the government collected more money than they ever had before, thanks to lower taxes, less regulation. It's not that hard. I mean, they make it so much harder than it needs to be, really.
It sounds like the Laffer curve to me.
Art Laffer is a smart man, a very, very smart man, believe me. And Laffer got it. Reagan got it. You know, again, these are things that should be pretty intuitive, but I think that there's just a desire among those in the political class, especially within the Democrat Party. And I wish it wasn't that way. Hey, JFK cut taxes, right? I wish that everybody had the common goal of just wanting to see better prosperity for every single American family. But this particular crowd believes if we take that money from you and we take that money from those corporations, that'll create a better economic environment. And in fact, it does the opposite, because when you take away, companies reduce their hiring and thus consumers reduce their spending.
Right. So they're going to kick the leg out of the three-legged stool. The only thing they have so far has been job growth. So now they're going to cure that by raising taxes on corporations. And the corporations are going to do what? They're going to reduce spending and they're going to lay people off. And we've seen some headlines already of even mega companies either freezing hiring or laying people off.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is where I think we're going to run the risk of going into a much bigger recession than it needs to be. And this is because government's getting in the way, messing everything up. Larry Summers, actually, not exactly conservative. Larry Summers was the Treasury Secretary, of course, under Bill Clinton, and then was the head of the National Economic Council under Barack Obama. And Summers has made the point over and over again that the Fed overdid it. I mean, he's completely aligned with what I've been saying for so long. They way overdid it in terms of this, what, $6 trillion that they printed for an insane amount of time. They overdid it, and now they've got to overreact to rein things in. The other wrinkle to this, guys, is that inflation, which is clocking in at, what, 9.1%, in actuality, it may be a whole lot worse. And the reason for that is we have changed the way we calculate inflation now. So nowadays, the Fed looks at a metric that strips housing right out of the inflation scenario. So in reality, if you put housing back in like they did prior to 1983, you know, back in the 70s and the 60s, they always kept housing in there. I would suspect that actual inflation is somewhere around 17% right now.
Wow.
And with that in mind, these 75 basis point hikes from the Federal Reserve, they're not going to cut it. They're just going to act like a little bit of a constriction while simultaneously having an inflationary, you know, stimulus effect from the federal government. It's like they're canceling each other out, and we're going to be in no man's land, and we're going to sink, and we're going to sink, and we're going to sink until somebody comes in with a couple of brain cells that can figure this whole mess out.
You know, this reminds me of Bill Clinton. What is, you know, with the redefining of everything. No, there's no recession. And you mentioned what is a woman? And I mean, the list goes on and on under this current administration. Biden inherited a growing economy under President Trump. And all he had to do essentially is sit on hands. But he despised everything about Trump so much. And he was also trying to placate the radical base that everything is just being shaken out and shaken upside down.
Yeah. Look, Deneen, I think his ego is way outsized in terms of his ability. All right. I don't know him well, but he wasn't exactly a star student in undergrad.
He says he was.
and I don't think he was first choice to even be the Democrat nominee. Certainly not back in 2016, right? They passed on him. And he was kind of just, you know, there are a lot of people that didn't like the drama surrounding the Trump administration and the media, et cetera. And so a lot of independents said, okay, well, we're going to vote against Trump as opposed to for Biden. I don't think it was a vote for Biden. They were just like, okay, that's that guy that's in his basement. And how could he screw anything up? The economy's doing great. We're on a good path. And so they didn't really think through the policy implications of what they were getting. And now they're waking up to the reality that we've got a pretty disastrous economy because you've put a bunch of people in charge that don't know what they're doing. And I say that knowing that I don't think that Biden is able to kind of really lead and rally the troops. You've got a lot of different fiefdoms right over there. You got the energy department. You've got the transportation department with a guy who wants to be president, Pete Buttigieg. You've got the vice president who doesn't want to take on the assignments that she's been given. You've got a whole bunch of people that aren't really working together with a common agenda. And I think that's a challenge. So he's not leading properly in that sense. And then the other issue is he wants to, take all this stuff on and appease the left. Remember when he brought all the professors from all the academic institutions and the historians to the White House? They sat down. He said, what can I do to be the next FDR effectively? And they said, this, that, and the other. He wants to get all this stuff done, but he doesn't have the votes to do it. They're in the Senate, thankfully. I mean, we'll see. Manchin's coming around a bit, but he's got very big ambitions and a pretty sizable ego, and he's not delivering enough for the American people. And people see through it in 2 seconds. That's what's happening. They're so disenchanted.
Yeah, obviously the spending was a huge problem resulting in inflation, but also Biden's energy policy is just plain horrendous. He is kneecapping our domestic energy production at all levels, where you can drill and restricting pipelines through the EPA. It goes on and on. How much do you think the energy policy has contributed to inflation?
Massively, massively. And consider what was going on even before Biden came into office. With the shutdown, you had all that energy coming offline. Donald Trump actually very smartly went out and purchased a bunch of oil so that we could fill our strategic petroleum reserve. The Democrats were furious about it at the time. They called it a handout to the big oil companies. Like, no. The idea is to buy low and sell high, right? Anyway, he bought all that oil pretty darn low. The problem is now Joe Biden needs it, right? And so he's trying to flood the market with this oil. He's ought to be thankful that it was put there in the first place. But you had energy companies, Tom, who said, well, maybe we don't want to be investing in this because it looks like we don't know how long we're going to be in this shutdown, et cetera. So there was already a pullback within the space on the investment front. And then Biden comes into office, and Biden makes it very clear that he has no interest in facilitating any of these fossil fuel style companies and will make life rather difficult. So if you're an energy investor, do you really want to invest in something where the White House is telling you we're going to make your life really difficult? We just canceled Keystone and we have no interest in furthering any of these projects. No, of course you're not going to do that. So consequently, you saw all these companies pull their money out of the energy industry. When that happens, it means you're constricting the amount of energy in the here and now and also, importantly, in the future, which has an effect on oil prices. It's a shame. Only because, look, I have nothing against green energy. Go for it. I want all the energy we can possibly have. Believe me, I'll take all that and more. Bring it on. Windmills, solar panels, go for it. But do not make the American people pay the price in the interim as you make this quote unquote transition. That's not right. That's not fair. And they're not going to do it. I mean, I think the American people are going to vote you out of office before you ever get everybody driving an electric vehicle, because they don't have 60 grand, right, hanging around in their back pocket to go buy a new car. And it's very elitist thinking, very myopic thinking, to think that you can just with a flip of a switch, change consumption behaviors. Look, the world still needs energy. And until that changes, and until you create a market alternative that's worthwhile, it's not going to happen. You're just going to make life miserable for the very people that you promised to help.
Yeah, the other thing that you mentioned, the word elitist, and I can't help but think of Buttigieg. I guess it was at a hearing where he was basically cheering on high energy prices because then you're going to be forced to buy an electric car. And Secretary of Energy Granholm had a similar thing, which he laughed about. What are you going to do to lower energy prices? It's their arrogance, I think, is a huge problem, and it is just so obvious.
Well, look, this is why they're going to lose. I'm sorry, but you can't be that out of touch with the struggle that everyday Americans are feeling. I mean, you just can't say, oh, well, this is good for the bigger picture. You know what? People, they don't care about the bigger picture, Tom, Deneen, you know that. They care about their families. They care about taking care of their families, about making sure that they have enough money to hopefully send their kids to school, to college one day, save for retirement. I mean, they're caught up in their day-to-day, and you have these big thinkers saying, no, it's better if you're poor because then you'll be forced to make these changes that we really care about. It's irresponsible. And frankly, I consider this a kind of economic malpractice, right? You cannot make the American family, the American people pay for your mistakes. And again, I say this as someone who appreciates green energy. I'm all for, like, let's work on it, guys. Let's do that, but do not do it at the cost of the American family. Do not do it at the cost, by the way, of our strategic independence, right? Like, do we really want to be reliant on other countries for our energy? I don't think so. I don't think that that's a very smart thing to do. Just look at what Germany's going through as they experience a 700% rise in nat gas prices because, and hope and pray that maybe Russia doesn't shut the whole thing off this winter. That's not a position we ever want to be in.
Sure. And it's interesting because a lot of people are taking note. Perhaps a lot of people were not heavily involved in politics and what the decisions were being made in Washington. But now it is a different story because with high gas prices or parental rights in schools and you name it, people are tired of government telling them what to do. And it is about freedom. It's about liberty. And it's about families making decisions that they feel are best for themselves and best for their families.
Yeah, I mean, I think Americans just want to be respected as individuals. This is part of what our country was founded on. And those freedoms are so intrinsic to who we are, to how we think, and to really the American dream. And there seems to be no appreciation or respect for that American dream right now and the power of the individual to achieve it. The idea is you need government every step of the way. Well, most people, if you really push them, they don't believe that. I think government should be there to help ensure equal opportunity, but government cannot ensure equal outcomes. And there's a team in place that just wants to assure outcomes that are sort of maybe equal, but sort of minimal for everyone. We're all going to keep everybody's going to be right down there. And part of America is this aspiration, right? You come here for something bigger and every generation does better. And that's that upward mobility that is unique, really and truly unique to our country, which is why I think when you look across at the demographics right now, you see that Democrats are having challenges with a lot of Hispanic communities. And they're like, wait a second, wasn't this a community that was going to go for us? And I'm like, no, because you see no one is people are the same, right? Like, and you want a chance to have a better life for yourself and your kids and their kids. And that's pretty intrinsic to all of us. And I think the Democrats have made the mistake of trying to overthink it. I'll just tell you this. I mean, you go around the world, you look at any socialist communist nation, and it just doesn't work, right? It fundamentally doesn't work, whether it was the Soviet Union or whether it was Cuba or communist Cambodia. It has not worked. And we know that. We just need government to figure that out.
Yeah, I hope the American people are connecting some dots, because if you look over the last few years, especially starting with the pandemic, where people realized that even the local mayor the governor, essentially has a life or death decision over you and your family. If it's not, personal well-being, like Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, former Governor Cuomo of New York, who sent COVID positive patients into nursing homes. I mean, that was a life or death situation that was horrendous. But they also shut down restaurants. And now American families are struggling with high gasoline prices and inflation. So at the end of the day, who you put in office is important. It's significant, because if you make the wrong choice, you're going to get personally hammered. And I sure hope the American people are able to put those dots together. And I see some encouraging signs. You mentioned the Hispanics. I think it was a Quinnipiac poll where 70% disapproval of Biden. I mean, not only can not harm Biden, it may go to Democrats, and it may be decades before Democrats may be able to recover because of the brand damage they caused.
It is serious brand damage for sure. I mean, I think we should just remember that we've seen that pendulum swing in the past. And, look, Jimmy Carter, that was a total disaster for the American economy and shares many similarities to what we're experiencing today. And of course, after Carter, we got Reagan, and Reagan understood, thanks to his own sort of individualism and respect for the individual, but also some smart people around him like Art Laffer. He understood that the need to really rev up that American engine, and he did, the American economy. And so we had good things that came of that, and I think that can happen again. I think Americans have had a bad go of it. And we'll probably see some change come November. We will see some change come 2024. And that means better stuff ahead for the country. But it's important we work through this, right? Because the greatest thing about this country is we can vote our leaders out. We're not stuck with them forever. And I suspect that there's going to be a lot of people that are voted out thanks to these troubles.
For sure. And we touched on the polls in terms of Biden's approval. There are also a lot of businesses, a lot of companies that supported Biden for president. You think they're having buyer's remorse?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I think no one actually thought it could be this bad, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, okay.
Why am I laughing? But
he's not great. He may not be the most talented. He may struggle with his speech patterns here and there. Yeah, he's a bit older. Nobody thought he could really do this bad a job. I mean, I did, because I was worried about the economic stuff. And I think although in fairness, right? In fairness, it was kind of double whammy. It wasn't just him. It was the Federal Reserve as well. I would have thought Jerome Powell, who, by the way, was Trump's pick. Jerome should have known some of these. I mean, what was he thinking, printing all this money for such an indefinite amount of time? He came from the business world. He has experience enough. He should have been different. But, his old boss, Janet Yellen, is over there at Treasury. And you just got to wonder, he was up for renewal. Right. And to me, I would care more about the health of the economy. I mean, if I was head of the Federal Reserve, I would have said, I don't care two bits about my renewal. I don't care if they label me as Trump's guy, whatever. I am going to do the right thing for this economy, no matter what Janet Yellen may be whispering in my ear. And yet he didn't. He did get renewed, but prior to that renewal, he was just printing and printing and printing. And it was so obviously wrong. So as much as I want to say, okay, it's all Biden's fault, and believe me, a good portion of it is, like, there's blame to go around here. And I'm amazed by the failure of these individuals who have the experience, have the education, have the academic knowledge, if you would, right, to have known better. They don't get it.
No, it's truly frightening. And I was sitting here laughing to myself when you mentioned some people thought that Biden would just sit there and not do damage. I remember I spent about 25 years in corporate America. And to my view, there are three groups of people. The few people that actually do good a lot of people who actually do nothing, which is okay, but then there's a group of people who actually do damage. And it was those people who did damage were really the source of the problems. The people who did nothing weren't the problem. It was those who did damage.
And I think this is one of the reasons why he's polling so badly, Tom. I think that a lot of people that were in the middle, independents that may have voted for him, they feel more frustrated, right? Because they realize, wait a second, the guy who was just supposed to keep the wheels on the bus, let them go flying off. And they had higher hopes and expectations for him. So they're really disenchanted. The reality is, if the Democrats want any shot at 2024, they cannot run Joe Biden. But play this one out. I mean, I don't know who they run. I've said Gavin Newsom might be one that could primary Joe Biden. But if you're Kamala Harris, and there are fractions of the party that are very much in her favor, they're going to say, wait a second, like, why is this guy from California coming in and stealing her thunder? I think Pete Buttigieg would face similar issues. So they're going to have an internal battle that they're going to have to work through. And there may be a contingency of that camp that says the easiest option is to just keep Joe there. But Americans aren't going to vote for Joe, not twice. What is it? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. People are not going to vote for him twice. The Democrats back in, I don't know what year that was. I was a kid, I remember. And my parents were in favor at the time of Teddy Kennedy. And Jimmy Carter was primary, but he didn't succeed. But had he succeeded, he might have had the Democrats might have had a better shot against Reagan. I'm thankful it happened otherwise, because I think Reagan was just wonderful for our economy and for our sort of stability, right, as a nation. But nonetheless, if they don't run someone else, I don't know as they've got any shot at 24.
Well, the Democrats certainly have a weak bench. And just to reiterate, Biden has done a tremendous amount of damage in a short period of time. I mean, this movie isn't over yet. Before we wrap things up, Trish, is there anything you wanted to mention that we had not touched on?
Oh, no. I mean, like you guys are all over it. I think that, we as a nation, we're facing some real serious struggles. I am quite worried that it's going to get much worse. I mean, I think we're seeing small negative numbers here, but those negative numbers could certainly grow. They could certainly be long lasting. But I still, I'm an optimist always. I have faith in our people and in our way of life and in our freedoms. And I know when November comes, when 24 comes, ultimately the American people do what's right. They do what's right for them on an individual basis, which overall for the country is what is healthy for all of us. And it's protecting those freedoms, and it's protecting our way of life. And our economy is so central to that.
Mom of 3 and an amazing singer, too. If anyone out there doesn't know, please check it out. I believe it's on your Twitter or your website, Trish.
Yeah. Yes. That was my first love. Before I ever got into economics and business and reporting, yeah. I studied classical singing. So occasionally around the holidays, I'll belt them out, whether it's patriotic songs around the 4th of July or Christmas songs come December.
We love it. Well, thank you so much. It's great talking with you, and it's great seeing you. It's been a while, and we really appreciate your time.
Wonderful. And next time in person. Great to see you guys.
Absolutely. Folks, Trish Regan, editor-in-chief of TrishIntel.com and host of The Trish Regan Show. Thanks for checking out Reigniting Liberty. And remember, everyone has a role to play. What are you doing for liberty? Until next time.